Okay, hi everyone, I'm Josh. Today I'm going to talk to you about The Only One Left by Riley Sager. This is a book that's pretty mainstream, so I'm sure you've heard about it, probably why you clicked on this video in the first place. I picked up this book because it's getting a lot of hype, and while I'll dig in deeper to my thoughts about Sager as I go on in the review, I'll just say I've never been a big fan. I mean, I have enjoyed some of his books more than others, but generally speaking, I feel like he's not worth the hype. But then I saw so many reviews talking about how this book, it's nothing like his past work, where he somehow elevates to a new level, or this is one of his best works that he's ever done. And I thought maybe I'll give it a shot. Maybe I'll actually like this one. Do I? I guess you'll have to stick around and find out. What I'll say is this to start with. Sager is really good at writing a compelling story. It can be fast-paced, and honestly, he's really good at tone most of the time. This book is very gothic, and I felt that that feeling, the atmosphere was very, very solid. And that, mixed with his easy-to-read writing and very compelling overall structure, makes for a book that's just quite fun to read. That is hard to deny. My issue is, I guess, with the fact that I feel like people are praising this book because it's full of twists, not so much because those twists were done eloquently and really thoughtfully. And that is really a major theme that I'm going to try to explore here in this review about how this book mistakes good storytelling ultimately for just over-the-top absurdness. And I feel like this book had the making, had the framework of a really solid story. Not just a compelling story, but one that was actually fairly well thought out and fairly well executed in a pretty intelligent way. Needless to say, though, that framework's not enough for Sager. I don't think it ever has been. He has a certain style, a certain framework. He doesn't ever really deviate from that very often, as far as I can tell. And in that sense, he's a very safe author. He knows what people like, and he goes for that. He doesn't go for the surprise, the true surprise, which is to say breaking expectations of the genre, or really producing any real threat for his main characters. I'm not spoiling anything. Really, I'm just reflecting on all the books I've read before, which I think were about half his catalog. There's never any significant threat, like any real threat in the end for his main characters. And that lack of threat makes it really hard to find the central character very compelling. And quite frankly, that is true here too. I'm not saying he plays it safe, that there is no threat, or that our main character necessarily comes out unharmed. What I'm saying is that expectation I have made it difficult for me to care for our main character. And in fact, the first quarter of the book, maybe, I was like thinking to myself, why am I reading this? I am completely emotionally removed from the storytelling. I have no interest whatsoever. But it was once our main character intersected with the central thesis of this book, which is to say, Miss Hope. She is this older woman who is paralyzed, bedridden, and she is the only one left of the Hope family, who were all murdered mysteriously earlier in her childhood. She's like 60-something now, and she was like 17 when it happened. Everyone thinks that she did it, but there was not enough evidence to convict. Ergo facto, she's out and she's alive, but she's a caretaker. Kit, I won't tell you too much about her background. I'll just say that she's a caretaker. Not exactly a nurse, but basically a nurse and caretaker combined. And something happens to her, or has happened to her when we enter the book, that has left her in this position where she has to take this job, even though she's extremely uncomfortable working for a supposed murderer, even if that murderer is in bed and unable to move effectively at all, or even speak for that matter, because of the strokes that she's had to experience. And she's forced in this position. And what's forcing her is meant to mirror the story of Miss Hope herself. And while I can see how it does, I feel like it fundamentally doesn't really fit, for reasons I will elaborate when I get to the spoiler section. For now, I'm just going to keep it spoiler-free. But once she does get to the Hopes, what we call Hope's End, to this house, this major house on this major cliff, which, by the way, a major plot point is just that the cliff is eroding away and it's not staying stable. So that's another threat for our main character, for the story at large, for all the characters in this house. And once we're there, once we start to find out more about not just her history, but even just the entire setup of this house, the way it sort of challenges our expectations of what the type of woman she is based off what society, whether what the lore is about her having killed her family. And eventually we start to get this situation where even though she is bedridden and she can't speak and she can't move, she does have the ability to control one hand. And with that, she's able to start typing messages to our main character, Kit. And we're getting snippets of her story, just told very, very succinctly and very rarely. And it's unfortunate because, quite frankly, her story is the most compelling, in my opinion, the most well thought out and most intelligent part of the book. But as with many things, it's surrounded by filler of Kit's story. I honestly feel this entire book would have been so much better served if we had just sort of let Kit just exist as a person who is a caretaker. She can be uncomfortable, but also still feel compelled to want to help somebody who is in need, because that's sort of her drive. And I say that not just the fact that I wasn't interested in her precursor, but because it's going to lead to very important ramifications later on when her story begins to intersect even more significantly with Miss Hope's. And it is that overarching arch in the middle, the overarching narrative of Miss Hope's life and how that's getting revealed that makes this book the most effective, the most compelling. And sort of in that in-betweenness of the book, I really quite enjoyed it. I think I even came close to thinking this might be a 4-star for me, which I was not expecting at all for Riley Sager. But honestly, it's a step up from when I read that one about the car ride, which had the most absurd plot points. But so this one, so we'll get there. I feel like he had the framework of the story, and while lots of what happens in the twist are absurd and over the top, there's a level of restraint that I was really impressed with, given what I know about Sager's style, what he likes to do. And it's almost like the Marvel effect, where they feel this need to constantly outdo themselves every single time, even though I think it just doesn't suit the story. If anything, it makes the entirety of the real important part of the story feel less significant. But with that aside, I did find that central story of Miss Hope very compelling. Now, as far as characterization actually goes, and this will be the last thing I'll talk about before I get into actual spoilers, I don't think the characters are that in-depth. We have our assumptions challenged, but I think that's more one of the many twists Sager feels the need to give us, which is to say, oh, here's the caricature that is this person. Surprise, they're in this caricature instead. So we're just swapping one caricature for another. It's not really depth so much as just, one of the many twists. And I guess, there's a twist, blah, blah, blah. It's one of the reasons why I think the story doesn't excel as being particularly spectacular, even if the characters are fairly compelling. I guess with that, let's just start digging into why I think the story didn't work. For now, I'm going to start with just say some, not hard spoilers, but just directional spoilers, the direction the story is going to go in. As we get into the story, as we start to understand the history of Miss Hope and what happened with her family that night, it sort of all culminates, is that the right word? Culminates on this one such a surprise where we find out everything we've been told just isn't true. There's actually a complete twist on our head. Some people, I think, predicted it. I didn't, but I wasn't thinking too hard about it. Partly because I feel like everything we're being told is like, if something is, this is what you're told, you can assume it. The one thing you do know is it's not that. God forbid Sager be direct. But we found out this is not the case. And I'm like, wow, this is a surprise. It's a little over the top. But if this is how it seems to be hinting at, that's a fairly compelling or rather surprising direction to go. Things appeared to begin to sort of be tampering down. Like we found out this is the truth, and it seemed to be leading in a direction that could be, in fact, much less chaotic and much less horrifying than we were made to believe. And that maybe the story was, in fact, the story of Miss Hope was much kinder than we thought. And that all things that have been happening that we think have been signs of some nefarious actor going on was, in fact, a misdirection. The reality is it was all an accident, and it shouldn't have happened. And one thing I'm talking about specifically, to get into a specific spoiler here, the caretaker that came before Kit, the reason Kit's coming is because she just vanished wildly. And eventually they find out that she apparently killed herself by throwing herself off the balcony. And we're trying to figure out what happened. Kit is convinced she didn't kill herself, someone killed her. And I thought for sure someone did. And then we get in the situation where Lenora, Miss Hope, isn't lying. Or rather, while she is lying, she's not the monster we thought she was. And there's no one really there for us to really to have a good reason to want to kill her. And I'm thinking, wow, that I'm impressed because this is a level of restraint that I would not have expected from Sager. And in my opinion, despite being a lesser conclusion, I feel like it really breaks the mold in a way that is a true twist for a writer like Sager. Needless to say, it didn't stay that way. It comes to turn out she was killed, but not by Miss Hope, not by Lenore, who also we inevitably find out can move around. It's by Kit's father, who was the lover of Lenore, who, by the way, was also Virginia. They got swapped. The swapping was over the top, but in my opinion, that could have worked. I feel like as a major reveal of the book. That turns out Virginia was Lenore. Lenore was Virginia, the sister who we thought had been killed all along. And I was like, that's a big twist. That could work, and it could allow us to go in a direction that would challenge our expectations of not just this book, but of what Sager feels like he has to do for a story to be good. But no, we have to add a villain. The villain ends up being Kit's father, who did not kill the parents. The wife who's being abused by the husband killed the husband. She tried to kill herself. She failed, and she basically pleads with and eventually coerces Kit's father into killing her. Fast forward to today, the story that Kit is finding out by Miss Hope, by aka Virginia now, that same story was told to Mary, who was the caretaker before her, the one who supposedly killed herself. And when she went and found the man who impregnated Virginia, who is Kit's father, apparently Kit's father killed her to keep it a secret. And I'm just like, I don't know, it's just a far cry from being an absolute murderer to being put in a situation where someone wants to die and they're trying to coerce you into doing it. And once we find out that he's did that, everything else just follows, where he's just a horrible person. He's a murderer. He'll do anything because he did that. And it logically didn't follow. Nor does the fact that just by happenstance, Kit's father happens to be the one who is the murderer and is the one integrated into the story. And it's just so out of left field. It's surprising because it's nonsensical. And you might as well say that the unhomed person that she passed on the way to the grocery store who asked for money was secretly her half-brother, who also was out to kill her for having a life he never had. Like, you could add that, but why would you? It's like this. Imagine you have a piece of paper. You can make a piece of beautiful origami with it. And it would take a real talent and effort to craft it and fold it in all the right ways. But if you're Sager, you're saying, why would you do that? Why would you limit yourself when you could take this and you could fold it once, twice, 3 times, in all possible ways until you just have a little ball? I don't think he understands what the art of origami, what the storytelling was all about. It wasn't about bending for the sake of bending. It was about bending to produce a larger pattern that created a picture that made a very compelling and well thought out story. It's the twist, but it's also just the fact that everything about him and how we're supposed to think he's some kind of monster all of a sudden, which is a complete 360. It just, the way it all connects, just doesn't work as well as I think he wants it to. From the fact of him being apparently a murderer to murdering Mary, which is a huge fucking escalation, by the way, to the fact that to being the one who actually did the thing that Kit was accused of, that is to say, Kit was in a lot of trouble because apparently she left out pills for her mother because she was dying of cancer, and her mother took all the pills and killed herself. Was it on purpose? Who knows? People are insisting that not only was it intentional, let me rephrase that, people insisted in the town that Kit actually was the one who murdered her mother and that it was intentional, that she gave her all these pills on purpose. Which, the problem, there's so much to unpack here. From one, there's no real exploration of death with dignity here. I recognize it's contentious, but to just treat it as if it is some monstrous thing, that with no real blurriness involved, is, I think, lazy and also just does more harm than good. Because ultimately we find out that the one who actually killed her was Kit's father. He was the one who gave her all the pills. And why wouldn't he, of course? He's just a complete monster who was happy to let someone die. There's just this complete lack of empathy, I feel like, all across the board. Because it's like, who was the murderer of her father? So of her mother, it was obviously her father, who was also a murderer of Virginia's mom, who was also the murderer of Mary. As far as the situation that led to it and the nuance involved, it doesn't really matter. All that matters is that he's the big bad of the story. And from the fact that he was just shoehorned in unnecessarily to the motivation in every situation not adding up, it just made the story way worse. He did not need to be here. In fact, I feel like you could have ended the story knowing that Virginia had a kid, but not knowing where it would happen to him, not knowing what happened to her lover who ran away. And that's just one of the mysteries. And I say that, well, we all want answers, and that is the traditional thing to do. It's one of the other ways that I meant before that Sager could have really surprised us by breaking the mold of our expectations on a basic storytelling approach to leave some ambiguity and allow us to wonder and know that some things will never be answered. And in my opinion, that would have just not only avoided the nonsensical insertion of Kit's father, but would have allowed Sager to do this brand new thing, new at least for him. Instead, it's clear that this is just this idea that Sager had, but it's like I said before, where you could fold a paper 1,000 ways, it doesn't make it art. It's like there's a satisfaction we have hearing these twists, but why do we want a twist? We want a good story for a reason, and I wish more people would appreciate that, or rather, I don't understand why people don't appreciate that. If you liked it, good for you. I mean, I'm glad you did. I just hope that we can at least agree, even if we don't agree that this is less enjoyable for these reasons, we can at least agree that it's lower quality if still enjoyable, because we all have our own reasons to raise them a certain way, but objectively speaking, this book fails on so many levels. And I was disappointed because I kind of got my hopes up, not just from the reviews, but from where I thought Sager might take it. It is what it is, I suppose, at this point. But one last thing I wanted to mention, in terms of death with assisted suicide, we're meant to believe that because Kit is accused of having killed her mother or having assisted her suicide specifically, they don't actually say that though, she's this monster. She is somehow comparable to Lenora, or in this case, Virginia, who might have murdered her family, as if the two are at all comparable when they're not. And two, honestly, I think much less of Kit for lacking the compassion and the bravery to really help her mother, to do the hard thing, which was to give her mother what she needed and wanted in that moment, which was just a release from the pain that wasn't going away. The fact that she didn't do it, in my opinion, is just a tarnish on her character. And I don't think the book realizes, I don't think Sager realizes that that's a possible perspective to have, because I don't think he really thought through this idea of that kind of situation. And it's one of the many reasons I just don't care for Kit as a character. I didn't find her story compelling. She existed just to tell the story of Lenora or Virginia. And there are things I'm leaving out, but really that's the gist of it. There was the framework of a compelling story that still had the highlights of a bunch of fun twists, but it took a fairly good design and thought, let me fold it a bit more to keep going with the origami situation. I guess a few other extraneous thoughts. Virginia being able to walk, she was supposed to be completely immobile. That seemed like one of the many, just to throw another twist in for the sake of it. It doesn't really deal with the fact that there were multiple times that she came very near death because she was unable to move, or supposedly unable to move, but she didn't react to that. That surprised me. Like, one, she didn't really react to Kit's father trying to kill her. Granted, she does react by stabbing him, but it's just a situation where you think you have to have a great deal of self-restraint to really think, let me limit my actions here when I'm very close to dying. Then there's also the fact that she had to be saved as the house was collapsing. I just don't understand, was it really not worth breaking that mold, not worth breaking that secret if it was going to make you fall and die with the house and whatnot? That just didn't work for me. I think that just one of the many ways that twist was unnecessary and not really thought out very well. Also, the inclusion of her granddaughter rather, the way in which apparently the granddaughter was able just to know everything. Oh, you're actually Virginia. Oh, and also you're faking it. How she figured that out was not clear to me. There wasn't a real good justification of how she, of all people, would have found this secret. One last thought. Before we find out that Kit's dad is involved in all this, there's this guy there who his name is, he thinks he might be Lenora's or Virginia's grandchild. And At one point, Kid is convinced that he killed Mary because once she did the blood test and found out that he wasn't related to Lenore, to Virginia, whatever, he killed her to hide it. And I thought to myself, that doesn't make any sense. Like, even if he's able to get another test done, it's just going to start with the same thing. There's no situation where that makes any sense whatsoever. And it's just one of the situations where I just thought Kit was stupid and the story was stupid. Anyways, I'll leave it at that. So a compelling story, bookend with a bunch of blah, in my opinion. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars if you care. Have a great day. Stay safe.